Hi everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I'm here today to do some more natural dyeing. Woohoo! I am super excited to dye some yarn with Madder and Weld. Weld should give us a really nice yellow, and Madder will be more orangey. I've dyed yarn with Madder in the past, but I've never used Weld extracts before in my dyeing projects, so I'm really excited to play around with this. But let's go take a look at the Earthues Botanical Dye Kit that has everything I need in it. The Earthues Botanical Dye Kit contains all the things that we would need. It's nicely wrapped. We've got instructions, and I'll lay everything else out here. The kit also contains the extracts and any chemicals or mordants that we will need for our dyeing projects today. It has the potassium aluminum sulfate that we'll use to create our Alum Mordant in a little while. And this version of the kit has 5 different natural product extracts in there. We have Madder, logwood purple, Kutch, Weld, and cochineal extracts. One perk of having extracts versus dealing with the dried bark or say even the dried plant material itself is that it is easier to dissolve and you're not dealing with picking plant matter out of your finished project. Today we're going to focus on Madder and Weld, and I'm not planning on using any of the other additives besides just our Alum Mordant, which I will show you in a moment how I'm going to hot mordant the yarn the night before we're going to do this dyeing. But my plan from the recipe booklet is to use our Madder at about a 12% by weight, so 12 grams of this pigment per 100 grams of yarn, and the Weld at 2%. So we're going to use 2 grams per 100 grams of yarn. These numbers seem big because you're used to acid dyes, which exhaust completely on our yarn. There are a wide range of different pigments and molecules that are used for natural dyeing, and some of them may not exhaust completely, so you might need to use a lot more pigment to yarn than you would expect to get a color that you want on the yarn. I don't know about these 2 colors. I have dyed with Madder before, and what did I do in the past? The Madder I used last time was a paste already. It was a paste extract versus a powder, which means that the measurement, because there's water in there, that does not really apply. I use about the amount that I use doesn't matter. I'll link to that video below. Wait. I was picking the amount of Madder based on some of these recipes here, but to get a medium shade of Madder, we could use 4% or 4 grams of Madder per 100 grams of yarn. So that's what we're gonna do. It's always worth double checking your instructions. This video isn't sponsored, but if you want to learn more about the Earthues kit, I will have an affiliate link to Knit Picks down in my video description, as well as links to yarn and other tools and equipment that I use in my videos. I may earn a commission if you make a purchase through one of my affiliate links. Before we go set up our dye baths and mix up any of these extracts, we need to mordant the yarn. And mordanting the yarn is a process where typically you'd have some kind of metal ion. You soak or heat your yarn with a salt that contains a metal ion in it, and that metal ion will bind to the yarn and make it easier for the colored compounds that you extract from your natural products. It will help that bind to the yarn in a way that's a little bit stronger, because otherwise a lot of these other cool pigments wouldn't really stick to the yarn, and so it just helps with that. Now, the yarn I'm going to be dyeing today is Knit Picks Wool of the Andes Superwash. This yarn is 100% Superwash Peruvian Highland wool. So let's go set up our Alum Mordant bath. I did a hot mordant on 400 grams of Knit Picks Wool of the Andes worsted weight yarn the night before I started dyeing with our natural dyes from the Earthues kit. I pre-soaked our yarn in some hot tap water with a little bit of dish soap for 30 minutes while I started preparing our mordanting kettle. While wearing my deluxe rubber respirator mask, safety glasses, and gloves, I prepared to weigh out the aluminum sulfate I needed to create our alum mordant bath. The instructions said to use the Alum Mordant at 20% of the weight of fiber. So that would be 20 grams of our alum mordant per 100 grams of fiber, or 80 grams of alum total, which I weighed out. Although I suppose that you could also use the ratio they gave of approximately 5.5 tablespoons per pound of yarn. I dissolved the alum powder in some boiling water, stirred things up really well, and then added it to my 12-quart dye pot, which was about half full of water. I started heating things up so the dye bath would be a little bit warm, but not yet hot, when I added our 400 grams of pre-soaked yarn to the dye bath. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to rinse out the soap, but I did rinse it a little bit, just because I felt like that was a good idea. Then I slowly heated up the kettle until it was just below a boil, and I kept it at this temperature for about an hour. I could have used a thermometer, but I didn't. If you're just below a boil, then you're around 200 degrees Fahrenheit. Then I turned off the heat and let everything cool in the kettle overnight, so that way I could start dyeing with our natural dyes in the morning. The next morning, everything was cool, and I went and I removed the yarn from the dye bath. 200 grams of this yarn would go to a logwood dyeing project that I've already published here on the channel, and then the other 200 grams of yarn is going to be for this video. Now, I was following the directions in the Earthues kit, and it did not indicate whether or not I was supposed to rinse the yarn after doing the Mordant bath. And after doing some more research on Google, I should have rinsed the yarn. Rinsing the yarn is a step that would have been a good one to do. It's not necessarily going to make anything worse, but it's possible that some of those extra aluminum ions that aren't bound to the yarn, but then come out into the dye bath, some of that could bind up some of the color and then maybe functionally make things like we've added less pigment than we did. So I don't plan to do any experiments where I examine yarn that I rinsed after mordanting and yarn that I didn't. I'm going to try to remember to add this step in the future. Before we measure out our dyes, I want to mention that I just dyed some logwood with and without iron. And my containers are not perfectly dry, they're a little damp. I did try to rub the insides, so I don't think there's any iron residue, but in theory there could be a tiny amount of some iron, and I don't know if that would shift the color. I'm only mentioning this because in theory, if things aren't as I'm expecting, then that could be a reason why. But let's go put on my mask and everything. I'm gonna want 2 grams of Weld. Peeling off the tape of this one is nice and easy. But again, with naturally derived pigments, it's important to keep in mind that these are extracts. There could be impurities in there, things that don't bind. We're not expecting, oh, I'm gonna tear it. We're not expecting our colors to exhaust, which means that, unlike acid dyes, we're not expecting the dye bath to be clear. Okay, 2.05 grams, that's fine. Now, if I really wanted to have high precision, I could remove some of the, oh, and see it's gone, it's shifting around. I could remove some of the powder. The reason why I'm not doing that is because the jar is slightly damp. And so with it being damp, I don't want to introduce moisture back into here because then it'll clump and be hard to use. Now, I did put the little zip bag in a bigger Ziploc just to, why did I do that? Oh, I did that so that way if there's any powder on the outside, I won't make a mess. And also if when removing the tape, maybe that introduced a little hole. Okay, for the madder, we're gonna use 4 grams. You can get a little feel for the ratio you might need to use of colors based on how much they provided. Okay. What I'm not doing here is measuring the volumes of these powders. I like to talk about how it's more accurate to do things by weight than by volume, which it is, especially if you do like a heaping teaspoon of something or something like that. Okay, 4.06. We're good. Now I'm planning on dissolving as much as possible these in boiling water. That's why those plastic spoons I used went into my sink, and I'll use a metal spoon to stir one at a time. The other nice thing about putting the dyes into these Ziploc bags is that I'll know which ones I used compared to the dyes I've never used before. The other thing that I probably said in the introduction, but is worth sharing again, is that just because an extract comes from a plant, it doesn't mean that it is food safe. And so all the tools and equipment that I'm using are dedicated for dyeing yarn. Because there are tons of plants that are poisonous, right? Out there? I think oleander is one that's often used in murder mysteries. So, I don't know. This is a dedicated dye trivet. Let's do our weld first. I've got a new electric kettle, which I'm very excited about, because it allows me to come and attempt to dissolve dyes, which this one doesn't seem to be dissolving that much. Ugh, it smells very planty. Yeah. Let's go take this over to the dye bath before we come deal with our madder. We'll be going back and forth between the two dye baths, two dye pots and two colors a lot. Thankfully, the colors are sufficiently unique that it shouldn't be a huge difference. We may have just needed a bigger volume of water. I'm going to rinse this out. But the good news is that I'm not seeing powders stuck on the side or anything like that. I think while we're over here, we may as well add the yarn. Okay, let's go. Ooh, that yellow color will be super pretty if that's what we end up seeing. Ooh, it would be really fun to overdye this yellow with indigo to get some cool greens. That is a lovely yellow. I mean, of course, the color we see in the liquid isn't necessarily the color we'll see on our finished yarn, so I don't want to get too excited or get my hopes up. But this is a really lovely yellow color. Okay, well, we'll be heating this up slowly. The dye bath isn't that warm yet. It's maybe a little warm. We'll heat it up so we get close to a boil, around 200 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm not using a thermometer to check that today. But one reason why I was less excited to try out Weld to begin with is that I get yellow from a lot of things that I've tried from around my yard, like forsythia and dandelions. But maybe those yellows were a little bit greener, because also I wasn't using an extract that may or may not have been purified. I was using the actual plants. Okay, I'm gonna wash my spoon. Okay, before we add our not quite boiling water anymore to the madder. So this is the thing with natural products. And natural products is pretty much a catch-all term from any molecule that you can find in nature that might have some use. And so you might say naturally derived, naturally extracted. And so a lot of things that we use in society, this is clumping a little bit. See how it's clumping on the back? Maybe this is why madder came as a paste from another company. We're not going to worry about it. We don't mind if we end up with splotchy colors today. Oh, I didn't need to do that. Add some more water. Okay, all of our powders are wet. I'm going to take the mask off so I can keep talking. But I was starting to say natural products would be something that is made in nature, whether it's made by a plant, an insect, bacteria, fungus. And so a lot of some of the medicinal compounds we use today, specifically antibiotics, are compounds that are originally made by bacteria that we have a way to synthesize to use to protect human bodies. But it's just really cool, all the interesting compounds you can discover from plants and things. And so it's a way that you can get dyes. But when you have an extract isn't necessarily a purified product, but it could be. So I don't know how they make these extracts. But I used to work on natural product biosynthesis, so I did spend time extracting things from various microorganisms over the time. I don't think I ever did any like plant-based ones myself, but yeah, it's just a reminder of my background whenever I do natural dyeing. I feel like my thought process has been a little bit all over the place, and I do apologize for that. But yeah, I think that when you get an extract, it's probably been at least somewhat purified. So there might be things that are left in your extract that maybe aren't, it's possible they aren't soluble, but there are ways to purify, especially compounds that are pigments that are colored. Those are fairly easy to purify because when you're trying to separate compounds, you look for the color. And so a lot of times those are things that we study in lab. So anyway, oof, this is cool. Okay, let's bring over our yarn. Now I believe that madder, you can add some compounds to it that'll shift the hue, and I will check my booklet in a moment. But for now, we are adding our yarn, and it's sort of an orange, I would say an orangey color at the moment. Quite lovely, but we'll slowly heat this up. Okay, my booklet says that madder can be mandarin to a burnt-ish orange. This is the problem with me keeping on reading the book over and over, that I get confused. So you can use madder in combination with cochineal to achieve a true red. And if you add calcium carbonate, you can get its truest colors with the Alum Mordant in hard water with calcium carbonate. I don't know what color that would be, how that would shift, but you can get a garnet purple if you add iron and do a long steep at around 100 degrees Fahrenheit, which makes me wonder from my other project if when I had the iron things were too hot. But anyway, this is a lovely, lovely color. And yeah, we'll slowly heat up. I'll be back maybe around 30 minutes or once we start to hit a boil. It's worth noting that I'm using one set of instructions to dye two different natural products, two different pigments. And it's possible that there could be some lengths of time and other situations that are better for some than others. And I mean, playing with color is a learning process. And so that's why I am just playing with these as straight colors before we go and try other additives to see what else we can do with them. So can you say use both of these colors to create a variegated yellow and orange yarn? Maybe, but it's a little beyond my skill set. The length of time it takes for colors to absorb, these natural colors to absorb, is much longer than acid dyes. With acid dyes, I could do something for within 3 minutes, get it to mostly strike, and then do another color so I could layer them that way. You can unquestionably layer the colors probably one after another, or mix two different colors. There's an asterisk there. There might be some you can't mix together, but you could probably mix them to dye something at the same time. But I think that like a hand painting technique or similar, that might be trickier just because, yeah, I just don't know how well that would work. And it might work really well with some pigments, but other pigments like indigo needs like a very specific process for how you bind it to yarn. And so you wouldn't be able to easily do that, mix that with something else. You'd have to layer it. So that doesn't quite answer the question. We could try different resist techniques with natural dyes. And as I play with them more and get more comfortable, maybe that's something we should do, where we can dye a twisted skein in one and then another. And that likely would give us some really nice differences. The one thing I have done to get something variegated with natural dyes is you can layer different mordants on in different ways, at least on fabric. And then when you dye your fabric all in one pot, you get different colors based on the mordant that was on that section of fabric. And so that could be really cool. That is something that I've done once on scarves. I don't remember much about it. about the process or anything. So there are things that you can do. I'm just way more of a novice with natural dyes. So for now, you know, doing the kettles is sort of what I can manage. But I imagine you could have little mason jars and have different sections in each jar. There are ways that you could set things up. And I was talking with someone about this, about whether or not you can make a self-striping yarn with natural dyes. I think you can. You definitely can. I think that it would be a little bit more labor intensive and take a while. And I think that given that I don't know exactly what's going to happen with each color and how to deal with it, because they're different pigments, right? I don't know exactly what would happen. So anyway, these are just a little bit of more musings as we play with the color, but I'm really excited to see how this turns out. And I hope I'm not heating things up too fast. I don't know how much that matters. Because that's the other thing. Some pigments, the heat could make a difference. There's many, many factors that I haven't considered. After 12 minutes, we started bubbling a little bit, so I reduced the heat to low. You can see we're bubbling. Ooh, we might have some good variation in there. If you want even coverage, you need to stir. I don't want even coverage. I want to see if we get a nice tonal. I like uneven coverage. That's my preference. So anyway, we're going to keep this on low. I'll wait for the first timer to go off, and then we will set another timer for 30 minutes, but I'll check back in. Our yellow is heating up a little slower. I just turned the heat up a little bit because I want to make sure we at least meet that higher temperature. This is a beautiful soft yellow so far, which on camera, I don't know, it's a little blown out, but it's a bright soft yellow. I feel like this is a color we could push more. But again, we'll see what happens over time. Uh-oh, we got too hot. Reducing the temperature. Is that some soap? I don't know, but the heat is on low for both as I made things steamy of our pots now, and I'm gonna set a timer for 30 minutes. Okay, we kept it at temperature a little over 30 minutes. I'm not even gonna lift and move it. I'm gonna turn off the heat, remove this from the heat, and we'll let it cool for at least 30 minutes. Okay, and here is our gorgeous yellow that I'm also not gonna move right now. We're just gonna let her be very pretty yellow. I'm gonna put the lid back on, turn off the heat, and we're gonna set her aside to cool for at least 30 minutes. Okay, after cooling for 30 minutes, let's see. This yellow, I think, is so much cleaner and crisper than when I did dandelion, so that's probably because of all the other plant matter I had there. Ooh, I feel like we've got some color left in the water, but a lot of the color is in our yarn, and that's pretty fun. All right, I'm setting that aside to cool. And we have our madder. I have a feeling that colors vary on if they're extracts. Ooh, do we have a nice clump there? Ooh, that could be cool. Ooh, we might have a good clump. That means that, is there speckling potential? Not that I would really want to try to speckle with natural dyes, because I feel like the pigments don't strike fast enough, but okay, I think on camera you're not appreciating the like fawn colored burnt orange we have here. It is super lovely. Both of these are nice, crisp, and clear. I feel like we could definitely pump up the volume on the yellow more, but everything else feels like a more true medium shade that I've done, at least. So anyway, I'm gonna set this aside to cool, and then we can wash it. Oh no, they slid and touched. And when I pulled it apart, uh-oh, we got a stain. We'll see if that stays or if it rinses out, because obviously there's colored liquid in the yarn. But uh-oh. We're still a little warm, but I'm gonna wash it because I wanna know if that orange is gonna come out or not. I should have put them in different containers. Oh my goodness. And because if that orange stays, that's gonna be interesting too, because we were no longer, well, we may have still been quite hot, but I really don't know if you can hand paint with some of these extracts, because if you were taking natural dyes out of a tree or flowers and harvesting and extracting the dyes yourself, you wouldn't really be able to hand paint with them because you probably wouldn't have the pigments concentrated enough where you could do that. But oh my goodness, I mean, we stained it. You could do that on purpose. I mean, I don't know if some of that, if it'll eventually wash out, if it's going to be lighter. But if the colors are striking that fast, it makes me wonder about dipping and steam setting versus kettle dyeing. But I mean, we are getting a fair amount of bleeding. It doesn't, the color doesn't look super strong, but the color in our yarn isn't super strong. Oh man, like part of me wanted to try to rinse it out right away. And part of the main reason why I didn't was because it wasn't that cool and I wanted to let it cool a little more. But this is giving us a really nice yellow. Now, would every color stain like this so quickly? Not necessarily. I have a feeling that some of these pigments might stain super fast. Others may not. In my experience, a pigment like yellow onion, we're still getting some bleeding, but I have a feeling that like some other colors, the bleeding is mostly going to happen with soap. But what I was saying is I have a feeling that there's some natural colors that strike super fast, like yellow onion. I've dip dyed into that because the yarn soaks up that color so fast, and the dye bath clears, which was super exciting. But not necessarily true for everything. And I don't think I even used a Mordant with that. I think maybe I used acid. But it really does depend on the pigment. And so I think we have a potential. I mean, if this really is in there, it feels a little wrong because like I didn't heat set it. But I don't exactly want to scrub it, and I definitely don't recommend using a stain remover like OxiClean on wool. But this is just a lesson to ourselves that we should be careful. Careful when you are dyeing yarn and storing things next to each other. I'm going to need to try to, I have to take a picture for a project, and so I'll just hide those orange patches. But show you in video because mistakes happen and that's real life. So let's bring over our madder to wash that. I've had bleeding happen from various sources over the years, but never that instantaneous. I'm even putting that weld through my spin dryer by myself. And I'm realizing that there is a non-zero chance that I am misstating one of these extracts at some point or another. And I do apologize for that. But I've never seen color transfer happen quite like that in all my years of dyeing yarn. I mean, I've seen that happen in a steamer basket, but before I've set it. And so that's just one difference here, in that our dye bath was never going to clear. And in fact, we probably could still dye more yarn in that same dye bath. It would just be a lighter color. But there's a lot I don't know about these pigments. Ooh, we do have that beautiful dark spot. Probably because there was a little bit of the dye that wasn't well dissolved, which, again, I'm not mad about. Again, I don't think it's necessarily worth trying to speckle. Like, yes, we have that dark patch, but ultimately we added our yarn to the dye bath and didn't move it around very much. And our color is very even. This is a beautiful fall toned color. I definitely feel like we could go deeper, but again, I was going for a medium saturation with all the different colors I wanted to play with, mainly so that way, well, we'd have more of the dye and we could have a chance to feel what might happen. But so you'll notice that unlike the other colors that we have so far, the bleeding here is happening longer without soap. And that doesn't mean that that would be used useful for dyeing more yarn. It's just, this one is taking longer to rinse out. But I believe also that this is a color where we use more pigment in terms of weight than we did any of the others. When I dyed logwood, I used a 1/2 gram of the logwood per 100 grams of yarn. I think what the Weld was 2, and this was 4, but maybe I'm mixing up the Weld and the Madder a little bit. So yeah, it's just, you know, each molecule is a little different, so we know that there's just a lot that is just sort of like weakly in the yarn, because if it was just a sponge effect, I don't think we'd see that much bleeding. But anyway, I'm going to keep washing this for a bit. I'm going to remove my gloves at this point. And I'll be back when things are clear, or mostly clear. Under the spin dryer, our stained areas definitely exist, but they're much more pastel than our color here, because the interaction was so brief. But long enough to stain! Oh man. Alright. Very quickly, with the removal of soap, our water is looking clear enough for me. This is a really pretty color. Like nothing I have had from my yard. Whew! I love it. Alright. I'm gonna go wash it, hang it up to dry, and then we'll look at the finished yarn. I want to take a quick moment to just look at the zip ties before we look at our Madder and Weld dyed yarn. These two are skeins that I dyed with logwood, with and without iron. Our Madder stained our zip tie really, really well. And maybe there's a hint of something on the logwood zip ties, but proportionally way more of the Madder stained this nylon than anything else. The cool thing though, if you move the zip tie, you see the really nice resist. This will work great for resist dyeing. Let's check out this one. We do have a resist mark here as well. It's just really subtle. I think that this would work with resist dyeing as well. It's just not the nylon. So this does make me curious. Okay, I see a little resist mark here. This makes me curious about what would happen if I'm dyeing superwash wool nylon blends with these natural dyes. Because acid dyes can dye nylon, but maybe the natural dyes don't. And so that is giving us an interesting experiment that we could do using, say, Swish DK versus Stroll Sport and seeing how that dyes up. I would say texturally, the yarn feels totally fine. Sometimes I've noticed a texture different from when I've used Mordants on yarn. I don't use Wool of the Andes Superwash a ton, but it feels very, very similar to Wool of the Andes to me, so I have no disappointment there. And the colors that we see here are true to what we expected. We've got a beautiful pure yellow with some orange stains and a lovely burnt orange that I believe we can shift this color. Maybe if we add some different things to it. Certainly though, if you use a different mordant, that can also shift the color. I don't plan to use mordants beyond alum just because of, you know, the different heavy metals involved. But there are different options, and there's great books out there where you can see natural dyes and how the colors shift based on the metal ion you're using for the process. Here we've got aluminum. In some cases you can add some iron. That's pretty easy. But I think there's chrome and all kinds of other things that you can technically do. We do have a speckle in here, likely from one of the clumps of dye that we had. If you want to avoid having any splotches like this turn out on your project, which especially if you're dyeing fabric, I could see wanting to avoid that, you can probably use a coffee filter or something to filter out any clumps as you're adding your dye into your dye bath. I would just make sure that whatever funnel or whatever you're using to help filter, that all that is also dedicated for dyeing yarn and not used for the preparation of food. Look at that! I can cheat the colors a little bit. Oh my goodness. I mean, if you look closely, you might see some orange hints, but I hid most of it on the back. Obviously, I'm going to be very transparent when I eventually list the yarn in the ChemKnits Creations shop as to the color of that yarn base. But I wanted to be able to get a picture of these natural dyes, and this accurately represents what we get with our Weld. I'm super excited to play around with both of these colors more. I feel like with the Weld, I can definitely pump up the volume a bit. I'm not sure how high you should take it, but certainly I think we can get, if we double the dye that we used, we could get a more intense yellow color that is still going to be very bright and vibrant. As for our orange, I think we can pump it up using 3 times the amount of dye that we used. I don't know if we need to, but it could be interesting to see the different depths of shade you can get with this beautiful color. Plus we can mix it with cochineal and play around with a lot of different things. Please let me know what other types of natural dyeing projects you would like to see down in the video description. But oh my gosh, imagine even with just these two, we dye our yellow, add on zip ties to give us resist, and then dye in the orange. That would be so cool. Oh my gosh, that would be awesome. But anyway, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I really hope that you've enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching.